What's up, YouTube? Back in today with another video, and on today's video we are going to be getting into some prep work for the LTD 5 litre. So what are we getting into in this video? We're going to be prepping an intake manifold upgrade for my 5 litre LTD, which you will have seen on the channel already. So we're not actually going to do the upgrade in this video. We're going to get it ready for a future video where I will fit this up with a whole range of other bits and pieces to hopefully gain a bit more power. So I will be fitting this up as part of a top end upgrade, if you will, of the intake setup. At least plan with this car from the start was always to just do the basic upgrades, at the very least the bolt-on stuff like the headers, exhaust, intake manifold, throttle body upgrade, the MAF housing at the very least, just to get it breathing a bit better. If you know, you know. The E-Series range of Fords, they come factory fitted with a 5 litre. They aren't exactly the most exciting thing to drive. They sound good, they're slow as hell. That's basically what you're in for when you buy a 5 litre E-Series. But there is a few things that you can do to wake them up a little bit and make them a little bit more fun to drive. So the intake manifold that I'm going with for this particular car is none other than the Explorer intake manifold, which is actually found on the Ford AU range of V8s. It's actually a common upgrade for the Aussie 302 5 litres, and also a very common upgrade for the 5 litres in the States, in the foxbodies and that sort of thing. So these are known as the Explorer manifold. Reason being, these are actually factory fitted on the US Ford Explorers. So factory fitted intake manifold on the LTD is known as the HO intake manifold. High output, far from it. A nice upgrade for these particular engines is to go with the Explorer manifold. They're relatively cheap, they're straight bolt-on for the most part, and reasonably easy to get hold of these days. This one in particular I've actually picked up from Pick Apart. I think I picked this thing up for about 120 bucks. I've pulled it off what would be called an NU Fairlane, which is basically the Fairlane model of the AU range. This one had the base model 5 litre, factory fitted with the Explorer manifold, GT40P heads, but the low output version that the Fairlanes come with, obviously. So I've pulled the manifold off that. What I'm planning to do is get this intake manifold cleaned up. I'm going to do a DIY port job on this as well. Nothing major, basically just clean up the ports. These manifolds actually flow reasonably well in stock form, for a factory fitted item that is. I don't have the budget to be spending the money on a Trick Flow, an Edelbrock, BBK, any sort of manifold of that price range. Those are all upwards of sort of $1,200 to $1,500 from what I've seen at least. There is nothing available locally that I've seen. So the Explorer manifold it is. So, like I was saying, I'm going to get this thing cleaned up. When I bought this manifold, it was completely filthy. Inside of it full of oil residue and gunk that's built up over the years. So I've sent this away for vapor blasting, got it all cleaned up nicely. Now it's time for me to attack it with the die grinder. What I'm also going to do as part of this upgrade is change over to the AU 5 litre 70mm MAF housing. This is basically a straight bolt-on also. The way I usually do it is I just swap the MAF sensor from the E-Series housing into the AU housing, and then it's basically just chuck it in and go. Also going to upgrade the throttle body. On this particular manifold, I didn't keep the throttle body. I actually gave it to one of the boys. I've actually got a BBK throttle body sitting on the shelf. But yeah, that's the gist of this video anyway. I'm going to be going through, doing some prep work on the manifold, getting it all ported up and everything. So I'll show you guys the process of what I'm doing at least. You might pick up some tips and tricks, you might not. I'm going to put this video out there anyway. And yeah, get stuck into it. So we've got this manifold back from vapor blasting. It's actually come up really nice. It's got rid of most of the gunk. Ideally I should have taken this baffle plate off before I sent it out for vapor blasting, but it is what it is. The rest of it's actually pretty bloody spotless. It's actually really good, really nice job. A little bit hard to see under there, but there is a hell of a lot of oil, gunk and crap that's in there. So we're going to take this baffle off. I've already removed 2 of these retaining rivets, so these run this weird spiral type rivet which gets driven into these little bosses under here and it sort of locks in. So to get them out, I've just been using a chisel, sort of just smashing it on the side of it and then just tap it sort of in the direction of anti-clockwise. Eventually it'll spiral it out. So I've done these 2. This one here I've already started hitting it, likewise with that one. They are quite stubborn, so once you hit them hard enough a few times they sort of unravel and spiral out. So we'll get these other 2 out, take that baffle out, clean the rest of the gunk that's in under there. Because I've removed these rivets and I'm not going to be refitting them, I'm going to drill and tap these to suit an M6 screw, providing these are smaller than 6mm. If they're not, I might have to step up to like a 1/4 inch or something possibly. Either way, yeah, we're just going to reattach this baffle plate and yeah, just reattach it with some cap screws and I'll Loctite that in place. So it should be good to go. Probably see that I've already started marking out sort of like a witness area of the port where the gasket would overlay those ports, and I'm going to set the gasket over the top. Describe the line where the gasket actually meets up with the port, and I'll open the ports up slightly just so it's gasket matched. I'll do this pretty much on all the ports, and then we're actually going to work a little bit further inside these ports, which we'll get into a little bit later. Runner number 1 and number 5 are actually the worst flowing out of all of them, so we're going to have to do a little bit more work on those ones. The rest of them just need a bit of a tidy up, so yeah, we'll get into that as soon as we've sorted this baffle plate out and cleaned everything under there. Okay, so MAF housing's been ported. Looks pretty good. Probably doesn't look that much different from stock, but I have taken a little bit of material off this midsection here. So the cross-sectional area through there should be a little bit better than what it was before. Yeah, looks pretty good. What we're going to get onto now is modifying the airbox outlet, and what I'm going to do is copy the HO EGR style. So I've got this little bell mouth out of aluminium that I've had kicking around in the garage for a little while. It's not an identical piece to what the HO EGR runs, but it runs something very similar. And basically this is positioned on the inside, so it should sit something like this. Not that it does much, but the HO EGR runs it, I'm going to run it. So to get all of this to work, I'm going to have to cut off this section here, which is not so bad because it's actually a fraction smaller, and because they've swaged this little bead onto it, yeah, it's not as nice. I've taken this little adapter off the back of the airbox as well, so this just unbolts. I've taken that off. What I plan to do is cut this, get it to fit inside here. What I'm going to do is assemble it, and then I'll see if I can swage the outer lip of this outwards so that it sort of locks into this, and then I can bolt it all back into here. Alright, so that's all done. Looks pretty good. Realistically, that's probably given me 0.3 of a horsepower, so doesn't matter. I haven't wasted a hell of a lot of time, but at least it looks okay. I'm happy with it. It gives me a warm fuzzy feeling inside knowing that I've done this little bit extra. So yeah, that's all done. Now you're probably thinking gasket matching isn't the answer all the time. I know it's not the answer all the time. It's just the ports on this thing are stupidly small. We're literally talking like an inch wide right now. Realistically, the factory E7 heads are probably going to hold up the flow more than this intake is going to. But we're going to open it up anyway, just get some nice transitions happening. Like I was saying, we're going to go a little bit further into the port as well. I'm only going to focus on the lower. The upper I'm not really too bothered about. From the research that I've done, the upper isn't the restriction, it's the lower that seems to be the problem. And this is probably miles ahead of the factory HO intake manifold anyway. So what we're going to do is flip this over and I'll show you which ones that I'm going to work on a little bit more than the others. So this is the top side of the lower, and you can sort of see the direction of the port runners. So these ones are quite straight, as in straight through the runner directly into the head. So these ones are pretty good. It's actually 1 and 5 that aren't exactly direct. So we've got a little bit more of a path, slightly longer as well, and they're on a bit of a kink. You can sort of see the shape of the port on these two in the front compared to those ones on the back. So those ones on the front we're going to have to straighten out as much as we can. There isn't a hell of a lot of material here before you start breaking through the wall, so we've got to be careful there. So yeah, like I said, I'm not going to go too drastic with this thing. Realistically, the heads are going to restrict the flow anyway, so try and get this as nice as we can get it. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but we'll do what we can before it goes on anyway, so at least we know we've tried. If I put a bit of light down the ports, you can sort of see directly from the port opening on the top of the lower through to where the port ends at the head. Number 1 is definitely the worst by far. So that's the path of airflow for cylinder number 1. Cylinder number 2 is a lot more direct. So that is what we're going to be working on. We're going to try and straighten the port out as much as we can. Like I was saying, you're going to run into issues trying to widen where the turn of the port is to try and straighten it up a little bit. So I'll see if I can open up just around this short side of the turn. See if we can get a little bit more of a direct path. It's never going to be as good as that, but we can get this a little bit better than what it is. Okay, so I've just scribed the other side of the manifold now, so just put a little bit of black marker there and then scribe the line where the hole in the gasket is. Hopefully you can see that. There we go. It's basically just as a guide to say that that's where the gasket will sit. Now, number 5 actually has a really nasty kink in this one, so not sure if you can sort of see it on the camera, but just inside the port, about there, I'll try and put an arrow on it, but there's like a nasty dip in the port, where this area is here. There won't be a hell of a lot you can do about that, unfortunately, apart from trying to flatten it off a little bit. Yeah, so we'll do what we can here. Also, you'll probably see A couple of these ports actually have little bumps that sort of correspond with where these bosses are for where the fuel rail bolts on. So just under there, there's a boss for where the fuel rail bolts on there, and there's just like a little bit of a lump there to accommodate the thread. So can flatten that off a little bit, but just be careful you don't go too much, otherwise you will break into the drilled hole. For this board in particular, I'm using this extremely long bit, and you can sort of just angle it in enough to get around that area there and there. So we'll see if we can sort of flatten that off a little bit. Okay, it's about as much as I can get to right now, but it's a little bit better, marginally. I've also tried to get a little bit of the material out of this part of the turn here, just so it's got a little bit more area to flow around into there. Apart from that, I'm not really going to get much more access into that port. This is already very limited. So yeah, we'll do a bit of a clean up around the rest of this port, just clean up all the casting dags and whatnot, and try and make this port a little bit more round again. As you can see, some of these have some really ugly transitions, which can be rounded off a lot nicer than what they actually are from factory. It's big steps there. So yeah, we'll go through and tidy this up at the end. Alright, so I've been working on this manifold on and off for like the last, I don't know, probably 3 months to be honest, because yeah, I've never got a solid amount of time to spend on this thing, so just doing what I can when I can. At the moment it's half ported. I'm only really focusing on the lower half. The top half isn't that much of a restriction, just needs a bit of a tidy up, but the lower half, you can definitely improve them a fair bit, even if it is just like evening out the flow between each of the runners. So yeah, like I was saying, I've got half of it done at the moment, so I've done from 5 to 8. Now I'm going to turn my attention to runners 1 to 4. So far I'm pretty happy with it. So you can see that the untouched ports, they've actually got a bit of material that sort of protrudes out around the gasket area. You can sort of see that area there. So I haven't really got any proper footage of what I've done with these ports so far, so I'll give you a quick rundown and I'll try and get some footage of the actual porting process that I'm going to be doing on the remaining 4 runners of the lower half. So starting from the top side, I've tried to gasket match this area here. It's a little bit hard to see because the gasket section is sitting flat right now. It will when it's mounted in between the upper and the lower, but right now it's just sort of sitting there. As you can see, it sort of lifts away. So I've bolted it down in some areas where I can, just to hold it in place. What I'm looking at doing is trying to put like a little dowel or something here and possibly here if I can, just so when the gasket actually gets overlaid onto the manifold when I go to assemble it, the gasket will sit where it needs to. It won't be sitting offset or anything like that, and it should be sort of located nicely. I haven't gone too drastic with the 3 runners at the end. I've mainly focused on this one here, number 5, and I will do so as well on number 1. 1 and 5 are actually the 2 worst flowing runners on an Explorer manifold. There's actually a couple of channels that I've seen where the guys have ported these manifolds and they've suggested focusing on number 1 and number 5, mainly just to get the flow to be evened out a little bit more than what it would be in untouched form. These two ports in particular actually sort of veer off. They call it a dog leg basically, whereas the rest of the runners, 2, 3, 4, 6, 7, 8, are actually fairly straightforward. So as I was saying, on the top side of this at least, I've only really opened it up to match the gasket area, and I've opened up the gasket in areas where it's overlapping the port. Pretty much just cleaned up the port as best I can, just to remove any casting lines and dags. Obviously there's two casting ridges that sort of run on opposite sides of each port, and I've just tried to make those flat and just remove any high spots. To do so, I've been using a whole bunch of little carbide burrs of all varying lengths. I've got some stupidly long ones that can get a little bit further into the port. Got some shorter ones. Been mainly using that style, which is almost like a teardrop style, but not quite a teardrop, and then the actual ball style. So that's what I have been using to at least shape the port where I want to shape it and take out the bulk of it, to getting it to the stage where it's got that sort of, I want to say like a brushed sort of finish. I've gone with these little flapper wheel type attachments. These ones in particular that I've been using are a 60 and an 80 grit, because that's all I could find at the time, and I've just been sort of finishing it somewhat with those. It's not giving a super smooth finish, but it's not giving a rough finish either. It's actually nice. It's a lot better than what the factory cast finish would be, and it gives it almost like a brushed sort of finish if I could compare it to anything. Which for the most part, all the intake manifolds that I have done port work on before, I've left it with that sort of finish before, and I don't know, it works for me. Professionals will probably do it different ways. Realistically, probably doesn't matter that much on an intake manifold. It's probably more the head where you'd want to focus on getting the finish right. So yeah, size wise I haven't really opened it up a hell of a lot, to be honest. Like I was saying, a couple of these ports you can literally see right through. This one here, not as straightforward, so that took a little bit of shaping. Hard to explain this, and hopefully I can pick this up on the camera, but I've tried to focus a little bit in this area here. Just trying to open up what I can, just so you've got like a little bit more of a straighter shot of airflow getting into the runner of the cylinder head. A little bit hard to see now because I've kind of cut away most of it, but on the top side over here you've got a drilled and tapped boss in the casting. That's for the fuel rail to mount to. It actually protrudes like a little bit of a bulge into the port right about there. So I've almost completely flattened that off now. So this is on the head side of 5 to 8. I've opened up the ports to where I've scribed a line from the gasket surface. So number 5 is where I've focused more on this side of the manifold at least. I've very marginally opened up the port on 8, 7 and 6, mainly just to get it to look even. Like I was saying, they are fairly straight shots from entry to exit. So number 5 being that it's got that bit of a kink or dog leg in the port. The only thing I could try and do was to try and straighten it out by widening the port in areas. Obviously you can't go too far before you actually start busting through the casting, and that's the last thing I need right now. I don't really want to be trying to epoxy things to fill in holes and reworking the port and whatnot, even though it'd probably be beneficial doing it that way. I'm not going to be making big power on this motor at all. It's just a tidy up while it's off. So in terms of number 5, I've tried to open it up a little bit around this area. I've tried to open it up very marginally up here. You've got a little bit more material to work with down here than you do up here. So I've sort of just dug a little bit of a trench, I guess you could call it, and just sort of blended that back into the side wall of the port. Didn't want to work too much on the side of the port, mainly because that's a coolant passage right there. So yeah, I've kept it fairly simple on the side, but just try to work in the areas where I could take some material off and hopefully increase a bit of flow through that port. Alright, so now I'm basically going to replicate what I've done on this side of the manifold onto the runners on the opposite side of the manifold, 1 to 4. Much like this side, the back 3 runners, 2, 3 and 4, are actually a fairly straight shot from entry to exit. Number 1's actually going to need a bit more work, much like what number 5 did. So I'm going to have to take a little bit more time on that particular port. I'll see if I can get some footage together for this. It's actually a bit hard to try and get videos of the process when the tool's actually in the way of the camera. So I'll do what I can, and I'll just try and take some before and after photos if that even shows enough of what the changes are. So we'll finish up the lower half of the manifold, and then I'll get stuck into doing the upper half, and saying that the upper half is going to be super straightforward because there's not much I can actually do just based off the shape of the manifold without cutting it up into pieces. So I'll just give it a very quick tidy up, try and port match the upper to the lower. I'll do a little bit of a tidy up on the entry of the manifold as well. I'm going to have to take one of my EGR spacers off a spare motor, the stock HO one at least. They're stupidly small, so I'll either try and port it to match the size of the intake manifold and match the throttle body as well that I will be running, because I'm going to be upgrading to a 65mm bore throttle body. The stock one is like 55 from memory, so it's a little bit on the small side, so I'll have to match this EGR spacer bore to suit that. I'll either take it to work and machine it up in the lathe, or if I feel up to it, I'll just attack it with the die grinder. Either way, it's going to be matched from the throttle body through. So we'll get stuck into the rest of this manifold, and then we'll go from there. So I'm going to start with a whole bunch of carbide burrs, mainly this one here. This is the one that I've been using on the rest of the manifold, and it seems to be going pretty good so far. I will chuck this one at some stage, and this one here is just a round carbide burr, and you can see it's got a few chunks missing out of it, but this thing actually still works quite nicely. I might need this one mainly for reaching into number 1. There's a few tight areas that I won't be able to get to with these shorter ones, and then right at the very end I will probably change to one of these flapper wheels, and that will give me that sort of brushed kind of finish that you can kind of see there. And all of these tools here are actually useless without a die grinder, so this is what I'm using. Nice cheap unit that I found, probably for like 30 bucks. Long shank on it. This comes with a 6mm and a 1/4 inch collet, so you can use all sorts of bits. I've got a range of 1/4 inch bits, 6mm bits, so change the collet out to suit and away you go. So that's what I'll be using, combined with this old school bloody compressor right here, but this thing here has been working a treat for years, so we're good to go. If you're doing this, highly suggest you get some good lighting. As you can probably see, I've got this little LED thing strapped to my head. This is straight off Temu, nice and cheap, works really nicely. So this is quite bright, so I've got a whole bunch of buttons, different brightnesses, side light as well. We've also got this cool function. Yeah. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to slice off these little raised sections of the gasket. So what I've done is I've taken the die grinder up to the edge where the gasket's overlapping the port. What that does is it sort of raises up the edge, and what you can do is just get the knife in there and sort of slice it away. If you're careful enough, you should be able to just slice away the bit that sticks up, and that should actually sort of almost be in line with the port. So we'll clean this up nicely, and then yeah, we'll get into the rest of the ports. So you can get so far with one of these carbide bits before you start to run out of reach. So now we'll change to one of these ball style ones. The ball style ones allow you to get a little bit further in, and it won't actually sort of start digging in with the tip like what this one usually does. We'll change the burr over, and then we'll get a little bit further into the port. When it gets to this number 1 runner, I'll do a little bit more work on that one compared to the 2, 3 and 4. Number 1 definitely needs a little bit more reshaping, and yeah, just tidy it up generally. Oh my god. Now what I'm going to do is line this gasket up like so. What I tend to do is just line it up so that the gasket is sort of sitting flush with these surfaces here, and then obviously lining up with all the sort of mounting holes and the ports and whatnot. But if you can get it to line up relatively nicely, I would then go ahead, get the scribe around the port in line with the gasket on all the ports. So I'll just scribe the line around the ports now. A little bit easier to see it on a black background, if that makes sense. So with where the existing port is and where the line is, it's not a massive difference. And obviously I don't want to take it too big. I will be keeping the ports relatively small because they're going to be matching up on the E7 heads for now. At some point I will upgrade the heads. Potentially the intake manifold might get upgraded as well, who knows, it's hard to say. But for now I'll do what I can to get it looking tidy, chuck it on with the E7 heads, and then see how it goes from there. Alright, so I think I've done what I need to do on this end of the manifold at least. So I've gone probably about halfway down the port from this end at least. And shape wise it doesn't actually look too bad. And like I was saying, I'm not going for all out power on this manifold, I just want it to flow a little bit better than what it would do in factory form. Yeah, like I was saying, this end of the manifold, pretty happy with at the moment. And what we will do now is we will extend our work a little bit further down now, and we will carry on and start opening up the head side of the manifold. Okay, so new day, new night I should say. Last time I touched this manifold we were working on the top side of the lower, focusing on getting these ports gasket matched. I have ported about halfway down the runners on this side, 1 through to 4. Like I was saying earlier, runners 5 to 8 I've already done, and those actually came out quite nice. So I'll still need to just add my finishing passes onto runners 1 to 4, in which case I will change to one of these flapper wheels just to give it that brushed sort of look. But yeah, making some steady progress now. Alright, so now we've got this manifold flipped around, so we're going to start attacking these ports from the head side of the manifold. There's a little bit of room to open these ports up, just looking down these ports. So this is number 4 at the back. Very similar to runners 6 to 8. A very straight shot from the port entry to exit. And then when you get to number 1, which is very much like number 5, it is a little bit more of a twisted path compared to these other ones. So, not exactly a straight shot through there, but with a little bit of work you can shape the port in areas to give it a bit more of a direct flow path, which should even out the flow between this runner and, say for instance, that one. Now it's never going to be perfect. Obviously these ones that have a little bit more of a straighter path, they're always going to flow better. Like I said earlier, the idea is to try and optimize number 1 and number 5 as best you can, without breaking through the sidewalls obviously. But there's areas where you can sort of open up the port, get a little bit more flow without it sort of having to follow kinks and twists and that sort of thing. So some people seem to get some really good gains out of it. There's actually an Australian channel by the name of Gap Source that's actually done some work on some of these, and he does some killer work. Big shout out to Gap Source. I've got a lot of inspiration from watching your videos, man, so the man is onto it. So we will try and get this thing sorted now. I still have a little bit of work to do on the upper half of the manifold. Not as much, just a general tidy up at least. It's mainly the lower half where the gains are made, and it's easier to work on as well. So yeah, we'll get this finished up. I'll bring the port walls out to the stripe line and just sort of lay it back a little bit further into the port, just so it blends in nicely. So yeah, once I've finished with that port, I'll go on, clean the rest of these ones up. Like I was saying, I'm not going to do a hell of a lot with 2, 3 and 4. I'm going to focus most of my time on number 1, trying to increase that area of the port, just so I get a little bit more flow through there. Just some progress, so haven't touched that one yet. I've just started on 2 and 3. Still have to lay this a little bit further back into the port. There's a little bit of an area just in here that I haven't got to just yet. So I will change to this particular carbide bit to get a little bit further into that area of the port. And then I'll follow suit with this one as well. There's also a little bit of a section in there which I haven't managed to get to. You can probably see the difference in appearance in that part of the port, but I can get to that with the ball. Pretty much going to be the same process with number 4. When I get to number 1, this is where it's going to get a little bit more interesting. I've got a little bit more work to do on this particular port, so hopefully the light in there will help this. But this particular port I'm going to do a bit more work on. I'm going to try and dig a little bit of material out of here, just so it's got a bit more room for the airflow to get through the port, more of a straighter path. I'll see if I can sort of lay back this turn a bit as well. Laying back that side of the port will actually give it a bit more cross-sectional area. This side here, obviously, you can sort of just try and lay that back once it's been opened up on that side. Somewhat straight in the port. It's a little bit tricky on this side of it because you've actually got quite a bit of a twist compared to the other runners at least. There's a little bit of material we can afford to take out of this runner and actually get some gains in airflow. So yeah, we'll get this one sorted and then we'll have a look at it once it's done. Alright, so we are pretty much done with the carbide burr roughing up these ports. Ended up having to resort to this stupidly long shanked carbide bit, and that is about as far as I can get into the port. So I've managed to more or less touch all the surfaces of the port, so that's not too bad. I've opened it up where I needed to and then just cleaned up whatever needed cleaning up. Got it about as good as I can get it, without me wasting a hell of a lot more time. So yeah, I'm pretty happy with how it is. I'm pretty happy with how it is right now. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to swap to either flapper wheel, or I might chuck one of these little Scotch-Brite flapper wheels in there. So this is a weird one. It's actually got little bits of sandpaper sort of wedged in between the Scotch-Brite. Never actually used one of these before, but I saw them in the shop and I was like, yo, I'm grabbing those. So we'll chuck that in there, see if I can get these ports finished off. Then that's me done with this lower half of the intake manifold. Finally. Alright, so we are more or less done. Well, I've spent enough time on it at least. So I am pretty much done with the lower manifold. I've gone as far as I want to go with this. So now we're going to turn our attention to the upper half now. The upper half will need a hell of a lot less work. It's more or less just a cleanup, mainly where the upper bolts to the lower. I want to port match it if I can, and I want to open up the bore at the front of the manifold, at least just in behind the EGR spacer. I'm still undecided what I'm going to do there. I don't have an EGR spacer with this manifold that I've got. I do have an E-Series one that is spare on my spare motor, which is over there. I might take that off, might take it to work and just bore it out in the lathe. Not sure yet. If I can find an EGR spacer that I can chuck at it, I'll just chuck that in to suit the throttle body that I will be running. At least then everything will be consistent from the throttle body through into the manifold. And then put that all together, and it should be a fairly good flowing intake setup. So yeah, quite interested to see how this one goes. we have finally got this intake manifold ported. It's all ready to go. It has taken way too long, but it's finally done. Pretty happy with how it's turned out so far. Ultimate test will be once it's fitted up to the LTD to see how much of a gain it's made. But pretty excited to try this out because I think it's actually going to make a good difference. If it's anything to go by, I have done this intake manifold swap on my old man's EF 5 litre that my brother used to own, and that felt like it made some nice gains in the mid-range, and it's a lot more snappy on the throttle, so quite excited to see how this goes on the LTD because it is slow as hell. But yeah, we're about to change it. So just a recap of what we got. Obviously we got the Explorer manifold which came off an AU Fairlane at pick apart. So I've done a DIY port job on this. Doesn't look like it's changed much, but compared to stock, this should flow a fair bit more air than what the stock one would. The ports themselves have been opened up, not a massive amount, like you could open them up more. I think if I was to go a bit more, there will be the potential of breaking through the wall of the casting, because it does get quite thin in some areas. Didn't want to go that far, so I think where I've stopped, it's still fairly reasonable. But yeah, quite stoked with how this has turned out. I do want to dowel this sort of around there, just so at least when I put this all together, the gasket actually stays in place and lines up with where the ports have been taken out, because there is a little bit of room on the mounting bolts for the gasket to wiggle around in, so I'm thinking if I just drill it about there and there, dowel it with some pins, and then I will drill the underside of this to accommodate those pins, and hopefully it all sort of like locates nicely together. That should guarantee all of the ports are inlined and there is no offset where the ports are overlapping each other or anything like that. So yeah, rather happy with how this has turned out. So yes, the lower manifold looking quite good, pretty happy with that. The upper manifold, like I alluded to earlier, I haven't touched a hell of a lot. It's basically just making sure that the ports actually lined up with the gasket as well, just between the upper and the lower. I wanted it to be a nicer transition. Didn't want any weird steps or misalignment with the ports, so I've basically just lined up the gasket. Pretty much replicated what I've done with the lower, opened up the port so it sort of matches the gasket. Like I was saying, I'll have to dowel the upper and the lower together with the gasket positioned in a way that it's not going to be protruding the ports, and then that should guarantee that the airflow is as smooth as it can be going from the upper to the lower. Aside from that, I haven't really done a hell of a lot on the lower end of this manifold. As you can see, there's still some casting tags in there. They are smooth. These are just the low spots of the casting that I can't actually take out without opening the port up massively. So I haven't opened this up much, but I have gasket matched it as well and made the port round. You would have seen how this gasket actually sat across this mating surface of the upper. The ports were not round, they had some really ugly casting tags that were protruding into the port. I've taken as much of that out as possible, tried to keep it as round as possible, and just matched it to the gasket, so there shouldn't be any weird steps or misalignment now between the upper and the lower. Other than that, I've opened up the throat of the plenum also. From factory, this was sort of sitting around that sort of 67mm approximately. It's really hard to measure because this also wasn't round, which you will probably see from when I originally started attacking this with a die grinder. Matched to the size of the EGR spacer that I'm going to be running, which is just the factory E-Series EGR spacer, which was slightly bigger than what the stock throttle body was, but smaller than what the Explorer throat was from factory. So what I've done here is I have opened this up to about 67mm approximately to suit the back end of the throttle body that I'm running. Once it gets to the throat itself, I've put the die grinder in there and tapered it up to whatever diameter I could achieve that was fully round.
Welcome to Late Night Net Scientific Bullshit for Beginners. Here is a basic diagram of the various bore diameters from throttle body opening through to the intake manifold throat opening. I hope this helps. If not, I don't give a care.
Not that this makes much of a difference, I don't think, but I'm a big fan of trying to do it as nice as you can while you can. So essentially I've machined the EGR spacer out to 67mm, placed it onto the plenum so that I could line the throat up. Found that once the throat was actually opened up to being a fully round diameter, it was about 68, 68.5. So I've gone in there with the die grinder and opened the back side of the EGR up just enough to get it to blend nicely. Sort of tapers very, very slightly. So once that's popped on there, that That transition in there is pretty bloody smooth. There's actually no step there, it just gradually blends into each other. I have opened up a very small amount of material in the throat itself inside the plenum that had a big casting ridge in there, so I've knocked that out. Probably opened it up a fraction slightly, but not too much. Probably not enough to make a massive difference. And then for the final piece of the puzzle, the BBK throttle body, which is a really nice unit. This one in particular is a 65mm. This is actually for a foxbody Mustang. I'm gonna try and make it work on this. Physically bolts on okay, as you will see. It just drops all in place, like so. Once again, that opening in there, that's been all blended into where the EGR spacer bore has been taken out to. So it's 65mm through the bore of the throttle body itself. Tapers up at the back to about 67 approximately, to which this has been opened up to about 67 in the front, then tapers back to about 68.5 to match the throat of the Explorer manifold. It's all pretty smooth in there, so it looks quite good. Now you're probably wondering, why am I still using the EGR spacer? I'm actually not going to be using the EGR at all. What I'm planning to do is fit the spacer up, bolt the EGR valve up to this spacer, leave all the electrics connected, but entirely block it all off, so it won't actually be functioning. Reason for doing this is to keep the factory ECU happy. Not entirely sure if you can turn this off. I was looking at possibly putting a J3 chip in this at some stage if I cam it. Once it gets to that stage, I might be able to delete it somehow or deactivate it in the tune. Not 100% sure, but for the time being, I'm just going to bolt it all up, bypass the actual EGR functionality, but still have it plugged into the electric side of things so that it keeps the ECU happy, doesn't throw any fault codes, and then it just basically thinks that it's still functioning, which it won't be. What I am going to do though is block these two off. Probably just going to cut them off entirely and then just drill and tap it with a cap screw to block off the holes, because they're all rusted through. So that's my plan of attack anyway. Now, in terms of the throttle body itself, we're going to go with the BBK one. We're going to make it work. It should go pretty good, because just look at the difference in size. That is insane. The thing I like about this BBK one as well, it's got a massive opening that tapers down to the actual bore size, so it's way bigger than it needs to be up front, but it just looks cool. What? Safe to say I cannot wait until this thing is on, because it should be fairly snappy on the throttle, and this is going to snowball. I'm probably going to do heads, cam and all that stuff very, very soon after, so rest in peace to my bank account when that day comes. But yeah, it's all part of the game. So yeah, that brings us to the end of this video on the prep work that I'm doing for the intake manifold swap on the LTD. Cannot wait until this is all bolted up and running, which hopefully won't be too far away, but hopefully some of this came in handy for somebody that might be wanting to do the same sort of thing in terms of the porting and what might be involved. I'm by no means a professional. I've just done this a few times and it's honestly not that hard. It's just focusing some time on it, putting in a bit of effort and just giving it a crack. So thanks again for watching, guys. Appreciate the support as always. Until next time, ciao ciao.